Thank you all for joining this call. It means a lot to Microsoft having a great community. Firstly, I hope all of you are staying safe amidst COVID-19. It's a challenging time for all of us, but I'm sure we'll fight this through. My name is Rajesh Rangarajan. I am a product manager in Microsoft Teams, and I own the application governance piece of the product. And what application governance actually means, and I'll be going over this in detail, is giving administrators the necessary tools and controls to effectively manage teams and applications within teams for their tenant. So this presentation is going to be a deep dive on that side of the spectrum. But as I walk through the slides, I'll inform why it is relevant for this audience as well. I have a few items on the agenda, 3 broad items. First is, what is the overall life cycle? What is the overview? The second topic is, what are those admin controls? And I'm going to go very deep in explaining what kinds of controls and what kinds of policies are available for IT administrators. And then, to put things in context, I'm going to have a demo, and I think that demo session can be interactive so that we can answer all kinds of questions. And happy to answer questions even after this call. We'll share this recording and presentation, so feel free to reach out if you have any questions. So with that, let's first start with app lifecycle overview. If you think about app lifecycle, it starts with all of you. It starts with developers who are working very hard to build delightful applications in Teams. And then the steps that follow is the heavier right side, where the IT admin persona comes into play. And the developer persona, along with the IT admin persona, is what defines the overall end user experience. So once you've finished building an app, if you see the steps on the right side, it's an IT administrator who gives a developer the permission to sideload and test, to ship it as an app in the public store, or to even ship it as a line of business application. So the two personas, the developer persona and IT admin persona, in some form or fashion needs to work in harmony in order to reach your end user. Why is this valuable today? And in particular, why is management and configuration of apps within a tenant important? And that's the piece in green that I am going to go deep in. It's those controls that determine the value that you all are working toward. So what are those values? The first is, as a developer, I'm sure you want your app to be available to a large user base so that they discover the app and they learn about the app and they start using the app. So what actually happens? What are all the possible tools an admin has to make that happen for your application? Second point is, if you've ever wondered why some of your customers are not giving you any engagement, it's probably because of one of these settings that I'm going to walk you through. And thirdly, it's important for a developer to understand how they can increase their total addressable market by understanding what potentially an IT admin is doing in order to then communicate with them. So I think those are all some of the value propositions that I expect to give you all today for having taken your valuable time to attend this call. With that, let me move to that green area, the admin controls for apps in Microsoft Teams. When I think about governance and when I think about admin controls, there are 2 broad categories. The first is permissions, giving permission to use an app or not giving permission to use an app. And then the second category is what the client side experience is going to be. What is the look and feel of Teams for a given set of users in a tenant. So let's start with the first category, permissions, and let's go with what org-wide policies mean. Just to caveat this, I'll be showing this in the demo as well. So if these user experiences are looking new to you, just bear with me until we actually go into the demo phase. So org-wide policies, the way I think about org-wide policy is what are the principles that a tenant admin wants for the entire tenant. And an example of one such principle is every single user in my tenant shouldn't have permission to use ADP Virtual Assistant, which means ADP Virtual Assistant is blocked for the entire tenant. They don't allow it for any user, no exceptions made. It's a principled approach for the entire tenant. And as part of org-wide policy, we also, if you notice, there's a button right on top right. As part of that control, we have additional features where there is a tenant level toggle to say, allow third-party apps or don't allow third-party apps. When you turn it off, it blocks every single third-party application. So if there are any third-party app developer on this call, if you're not getting your customer to actually use your app, it probably is because they've turned off a toggle at the tenant level. And it's important for all of us to ensure to firstly understand why the customer did that and to empathize with them and then guide them through so that they make the right decisions to enhance the productivity of their users in the tenant. One other interesting control as part of this is custom apps. If you allow the interaction of custom apps, users in the tenant can start interacting with line of business applications. If you turn it off, then any line of business application will be disabled for users in the tenant. So these are some of the examples of what you or any tenant admin can set as principles for the entire tenant. And it could change over time, but it applies to every single user across the tenant. The next category is what I call as user level policies. So I cited ADP Virtual Assistant as an example. Now let's say that we actually allow ADP Virtual Assistant for the tenant, but then the tenant admin doesn't want Rajesh, me, to use ADP. And it could be for whatever reason. Maybe I don't have license for it, or maybe I have misused it in the past. We don't know. But if a tenant admin wants to allow ADP for every single user in the tenant except me, the way they can handle that situation is by creating a user level permission policy and say, hey, block ADP for Rajesh and apply that policy just for Rajesh. That way, all other users are not impacted except me. So user level permission policy is a very, very powerful control. In fact, it's one of the most sought after admin control for governing apps in the past year or so. And we released this product in around September of 2019. So in summary, there's the user level permission policy, and then there is the org-wide level. Furthermore, inside user level permission policies, there are three broad categories. So ADP Virtual Assistant is a third-party app, which falls under the second category in here. There are two other categories, Microsoft apps and tenant apps. So if I were to piggyback on the same example, let's say an admin wants to block ADP for me, and they also want to block OneNote. At that point, it becomes a combination of Microsoft app and a third-party app. And they can block both those apps for me using a single policy in this format. To your right, you see a drop-down. By default, in any commercial tenant, so if you have customers who are in commercial cloud, we allow all apps in all categories by default. But if your customer is in a government community cloud, those settings change. And I don't want to digress and talk about government community cloud in this call, but I encourage you to go read the public documentation. As part of the dropdown, you have multiple options. It's either allow all apps or block all apps. You can also block specific apps and allow specific apps. So sometimes tenant admins go for allow specific or block specific because they have done the vetting on their side to ensure that the apps that they block or allow is something that they are 100% sure of. So in summary, I spoke about two different policies under permissions. One is user level policy, and then the other is org-wide level settings. And both of these work hand in hand. In fact, the example that I gave with ADP Virtual Assistant is a classic example of how it's enabled at the tenant level, but it could be disabled for a set of users using user level permission policies. The other category is the client experience. In fact, this has been very, very popular among frontline workers. If there are developers on this call who are familiar with frontline workers, there are scenarios where we've had customers say that we want apps to be pinned to the left rail so that our users in the tenant can access those apps very quickly. And if you're one of those app developers who built a product for frontline workers, you'll understand what I'm referring to. So the way this works is it gives admins the ability to pin apps on the left rail so that any user, and this doesn't have to be just for desktop, it also works on mobile. It gives the ability to access those apps with ease, click of a button essentially. And we call them setup policies. And by default, we give all the core apps, that is activity, teams, calls, chats, files. Those are all core apps that come out of a box, and that's the default policy for every single user in the tenant. But admins can create additional policies to pin particular apps for users to say that these are apps that are essential, they are used very frequently, and we should have them pinned for the user so that they are more productive. And we call them setup policies. Policies also contain two additional controls. So these are all the default apps that get pinned to the left rail. In addition to that, we have two other controls. One is, should we give a user the ability to sideload? That is what we call as upload custom apps. And then the other control is user pinning. I'm not sure if developers are familiar with the user pinning feature. It's the ability to pin or unpin apps from the left rail. And this control determines whether a user can do that or not. By default, we allow users to do it, but an admin can go and change that control. This is an example of Smartsheet where we pinned the app for this user, and when they launch Teams, they would see Smartsheet on the left rail, which makes it super easy for them to access, go in there, get their business done, and move on. So that's the entire goal of setup policies, and it's something that customers have loved. So in summary, I spoke about two categories. One is permissions and the other is client experience. So under permissions, it's essentially controlling the permission to use an app, giving permission versus not giving permission for users in a tenant or for the entire tenant by itself. The other is client experience, where you give permission to sideload, you give permission to pin apps, and then an admin can actually pin apps on behalf of the user. So let me pause here before I go into my demo. So far, it's all theoretical. Let me pause here to see if we have any questions.
Matt Hickey did have a question about app perms policies for guests.
Mm-hmm.
Matt, do you want to go ahead and unmute and ask your question in more detail?
Hey, Rajesh, how do these app perm policies work with guests, right? Like, can we set up a permission policy for guests? What I'm finding is that guests are seeing apps that they shouldn't.
So I think what happens with guests is the moment they come into a call or they come into your tenant, the default policy gets applied to them. So in fact, let me go back to the picture. So if you see in here, this is the global org-wide default policy for setup. And then for permission, we have the same thing, which is global org-wide default. This is the policy that usually gets applied if there's confusion on what policy to apply. Usually the default policy gets applied to these users. And if part of your global default policy is allowing apps that you don't want these users to have, that is probably the place to go and tweak things.
I got you. So the only policy that applies to guests is the global org-wide default. That's it. You can't create additional.
Not as far as I know, but I can confirm this. How about after this call, I confirm that question, and I don't know if Dana can reach out to you, but I can confirm this.
Yep, we can also post questions. We'll do a short blog post with a summary and any questions that we haven't answered, as well as I can post it back here in the chat if people can see that. So we'll have a number of different ways to get that answer to you.
Cool.
Absolutely.
I'd love to see that change in the future. I think it would be great to have more flexibility for guests, right? Thank you.
Absolutely. I've taken that question. I'm positive with what I said, but let me confirm. I don't want to give you any wrong information.
Okay, and there was another couple questions. Is it correct to say that core apps like Teams and Files cannot be blocked by app permission policies?
Absolutely. So that's a great question. They can be unpinned. So let me go back to my presentation. So as part of client customization, you can unpin activity, you can unpin teams, but you cannot block them using permission policies. And what happens when you unpin? When you unpin, it goes into the overflow. So in a demo account, it goes into the ellipsis. So it goes in here.
Can we block, this is another question, can we block an app for all users and allow it only for a few?
Absolutely, yeah. So that's the whole thing, right? So permissions is org-wide and at user level. And in fact, let me hold off on answering that question because I think the person who asked that question will get their answer in just a minute when I show the demo.
Okay, and then maybe we'll do one more and then we'll do the demo and then come back. Is it possible to disable the ellipsis?
No. And that's the short answer. And the reason is very simple. Is what we think of as the ellipsis is it's essentially like the store itself. Because if you see the ellipsis today, you can actually go search for apps in here. You can go and search for Trello. So it's a quick mechanism to get apps that are of interest, in addition to going to the full-blown app store itself. So blocking this it's not necessarily the best of all things for the user, because we will be taking away an essential feature that some of our end users will need.
I have a question on kind of recordings in the Teams meetings. When we schedule a meeting, we do a recording of the Teams. I know we can share it that recording with the inside the organization, or we can download the recordings and put it on OneDrive and share it to the external. Is there a way or an app I can enable inside the Teams where I can share the recordings directly with the external users outside the organization?
Unfortunately, it's an area that I don't own. but I think it's a very, very important question. So I've taken it down. Let me get back to you on that. I think if I understand the question, there's a recording that happened. It gets shared to members in your tenant, but you also want to share it externally from the team's client.
Exactly. So in other words, like like we organize a teams with our customers, and then we want to share that recording to the customers, as well as the recording should get expired after a certain point of time. Those certain those kind of things. Is want to do that.
So typically, if you've organized a meeting from a team, and if you have customers who are members of that team, they should get the recording, from what I know.
Actually, at the moment, it is not the case. This is
not
part
external,
of the stream.
no.
This is the stream feature set. That's why it is not based on Teams. And at the moment, Stream doesn't have the capabilities to let external users access it, even if they are a member of the team. So, and at the moment, there is no API for it. So even if you start to do a Teams application, you are currently not able to share this information. So it is on the roadmap for the Stream team, but yeah, Teams is nothing that it can do at the moment.
I see. So the only option we left with, we just download and then put it in OneDrive to share that download link.
Exactly.
Yeah, the only problem with that is that under OneDrive, people can download the video and take ownership of it, and that's not what you want to do for video content, because you want to keep the ownership yourself.
It's actually a great feedback for us as well. I've taken it down, and then let's see if we are able to prioritize it. And certainly, if there's a better answer, I'll share it with Dana as well.
Thank you.
Okay. Thank you so much.
That sounds good. One more question. Is it possible to send messages to channels using Graph API? We could only implement it in my app through the channel's email.
This sounds like a Graph question. I think the answer is yes, but I work in the same team as the PM for Graph as well, so I can confirm. Unfortunately, I don't own that area, but I can confirm this as well. So it's a question about.
As a bot, you can send a message to a team. It is a little bit different. It's not a one shot. You have to be installed in the team to send a channel message. So this is definitely possible, and it's documented in the Graph documentation. You have to look in the beta version of the Graph. Otherwise, in V1, it is not available at the moment.
And there's a couple follow-up answers to that as well, that it can be sent to the channel through the Graph API, and you can do it outside of a bot. Thank you, Lou. There's a link in the IM chat if you can access that. If not, I'll post that in the blog as well with the resources available and the answers to some of those other questions. I appreciate all the help with the community. Thank you so much.
It's exactly what we want, right? Thank you so much.
Yes. Rajesh, let's move on to the demo that you'd like to do, and then we'll come back to some more questions after that, I think. Does that sound good?
Absolutely.
Okay.
So I've already logged into the admin portal for Teams. So this is what it looks like. And whatever I spoke in the last 20 minutes or so is all confined to Teams apps. This is where governance for application within Teams happens. So the first step is not the first step necessarily. The first category is permissions. And I spoke about two categories, org-wide and user level. So first, let's start with org-wide. So under Manage Apps, an admin gets to see all the apps that are available in Teams. They can individually control these apps. They can individually block them, individually allow them by simply selecting them and saying allow or block. They also have the ability to upload a new app. And what uploading a new app means is uploading an LOB app so that it's available for users in their tenant. Under org-wide app settings, like I said, there are controls to allow third-party apps. There are controls to allow interaction with custom apps as well. And once again, this setting at the tenant level, at the org-wide level, it's a way to apply your principles for the entire organization. Moving on to the permission policies. So I spoke about user level permission policies. So if you see this, there's a global org-wide. It's the taxonomy here sometimes can get a little confusing. We call global permission policy, and global usually applies to a tenant or an organization. But in this context, global policy means global user level permission policy that applies to every single user. So this global permission policy is a user level permission policy that is applied to every single user. And across all three categories, we allow all apps by default. And when you go to users, these are all the users in your tenant. And let's maybe take Christy, for example. If you go to Christy's profile, under policies, we apply all the global org-wide default policies for Christy, including permission policy and setup policies. And by default, because global permission policy allows all apps across all three categories, Christy is going to see every single app in the team store. And then she can choose to add them or uninstall them based on her needs. One popular question that I get asked here is, what if I want to apply a policy in bulk? And you can do that using PowerShell and commandlets. Again, there's public documentation for that. So please feel free to read them, give us feedback, and let us know if it works. And then finally, I spoke about setup policies, which is client customization. By default, we have all core apps pinned to the left rail. And by default, we disable side loading because of security reasons. We don't want every single user in the tenant to sideload apps. And we allow user pinning so that users can pin and unpin apps according to the way they want their client to work and function. You can add apps to the global policy itself. You can remove apps and it'll work accordingly. A gentleman asked a question on the call about, if I had the question right, saying, what if I want to allow an app at the tenant level, but block it for a set of users? Did I get that question right, Dana?
Yes, I believe that's correct.
Okay, so to answer that question, let's maybe pick an example. So let's say that we want to allow ADP virtual assistant. So it's allowed for all users. And because of the global permission policy, ADP virtual assistant is now available for every single user. But let's say that I want to block. So I create a new policy called block ADP. I say block specific, and I search for ADP, and I add it to that list. Now I have a new policy called block ADP. Then I can go to users, and let's say that for Nestor, I want to block ADP. I can go and edit Nestor's policy. It's called permission policy. You can say block ADP and hit apply. Now what we've done here is we've blocked ADP for Nestor, just Nestor. Every single user other than Nestor will still have access to ADP. And that's the power of using user level permission policies. I hope this answers the question that the gentleman had on the call. I picked an example as well. So I picked a developer scenario, since this audience is mainly developers. And I created a new setup policy saying, let's allow sideloading. Let's allow sideloading, which means let's allow uploading of custom apps for a user. And let's also pin Smartsheet for this user because this user really needs access to Smartsheet. They use it every day, so let's pin it for them. And similarly, I want to block YouTube for this user because YouTube is an app that could harm productivity and I want to block it for them. So I go to block specific apps and I add YouTube to that policy. And in this case, the user that I've picked is John. So if you go to John's profile, I've applied the policy for John where I say permission policy is block YouTube and app setup policy is allow side loading, and I should have called it allow side loading and pin Smartsheet, but I think you get the point. So now that I've applied this policy for John, if I go to John's Teams client, this is John Smith, you'll see that I have Smartsheet here. And when I go to the App Store and when I search for YouTube, there's no YouTube. And also John gets to see this button, which is upload a custom app, because I've given John permissions to sideload apps. So the key point here is if you're a developer who wants to test apps within Teams, you should communicate with your administrator saying that, hey, I need to see this button because I want to test the apps that I build. The other point that we should all gather is admins end up controlling, and for the right reasons, they end up controlling things for users in their tenant. And it's probably the reason why sometimes usage for an app goes up or goes down. And it mainly revolves around some of the controls that I showed today. So this is a very short demo, but I think we can now open up to questions as well.
I have a question like, will the user be able to see what policies are applied to him?
No.
There's no way to see, the user can see what policies are applied.
No, the user will not know. So it's a black box for the user. So let's say that you've applied a policy saying block ADP or block YouTube. They won't see YouTube like I showed you, but they won't know that they don't see YouTube because you've applied a policy. They can probably guess because they'll be like, okay, other users have it. My colleagues have it. I don't have it. So maybe it's a policy. But we don't explicitly go and tell them that, hey, this is the policy and admin has applied it for you. But I think my question back to you, which is kind of raising curiosity, is do you see value in that?
No, I was just curious to know about it, whether the user will be able to, because if some users say that, well, why I'm blocked for this YouTube or something like that, just like that. So.
Got it.
Thank you.
I have a question.
Please.
Yeah. Rajesh, is website, like in the channels you have those apps, is website considered a default app from Microsoft?
So the answer is it is a default app. When you say default app, are you saying that it's a core app?
I don't know the difference. I'm sorry.
Okay. So there are these taxonomies, so I apologize. When I say core apps, I'm just talking about apps like activity, themes, chat, calls and files and all of those. Those are all core apps. Website is not a core app per se. It's a tab that we give as part of the tab gallery. We don't go and actually pin it or install it for the user. The user can take action to do that. But by default, it's available for the user. Does that answer your question?
Yes, it does. And how do you disable that app if I want to do that?
So let's try it.
So just create a new policy here, correct?
Yeah. So you can go into block specific and then, oh no, I'm sorry. It's a Microsoft app, right? So, and you can just add it to a policy.
Okay. Quick question. So I'm actually a user level. I am not an administrator. So of course I can't see that. Was there a recent push by Microsoft that has disabled website as a app, you think? Did it happen
in a commercial tenant, we as Microsoft didn't take any action to go and disable website for users. So it could be an IT administrator thing that happened.
Yes, I actually did assume that, but I did not get an accurate answer. I just want to confirm that. I also assumed that, but IT admin refused to respond, and so I'm just trying to get an understanding who did what, right? So thank you for that.
Yeah, as far as I know, in a commercial tenant, we proactively don't go and block website. We allow it. Unless, are you in a GCC tenant?
No. I'm in USA.
Yeah, US. But do you work for any government agency or something like that?
Yes, I do.
You do? Okay, so I think that explains it, right? So may I ask the name of the organization you work for?
I'd rather not take it out loud. I think you can. I think your colleague can see it, though.
Got it. Okay, I'm sorry. Yeah, so if you actually work for, in general, not referring to you, for government community cloud, if your tenant is a GCC tenant, website tab will be blocked, and we've documented this publicly as well.
No, quick, but you can enable the website tab, correct?
Yeah, you can enable it, but out of box default is disabled.
Okay, that's fine. I'm sorry, this follow-up question. I saw a raise hands in the screen, an earlier screen you're showing us. Is that an option available to everybody now? You're showing your screen, so I was just curious.
I unfortunately I don't own that feature, so
it is not yet available to the broad audience. It is an internal Microsoft Ring and some top partners.
Please put it out because Zoom is winning on that side. So thank you.
Thank you.
Also, the 9 videos that we saw before, that was pretty cool. Can't wait for that one.
Oh, yeah.
Got a question? Yes, here. So I've got basically 2 questions. First one is, like we currently don't have any option to, call anybody other than our organization. Like, for example, I have a tenant with ABCD domain, abcd.com, and I want to call XYZ without conducting a proper meeting. Just in Skype for Business, we can add users from outside the organizations to our contacts and call them. So it's not available currently in Teams. Is there any chance that it will be included?
Unfortunately, I don't know the answer to this. It sounds like a calling policy. I can take an action and see if I can get back to you on this, but unfortunately, I'm not sure.
I got a question.
Please.
Regarding actually the installed apps by the user, is there any monitoring possibility? Like, you know what I mean? Like, if a user have installed 3 third-party apps, so that like a trend, okay, for example, for governance reason, you can say like a sales is more likely to use that app.
You mean to say like you want to know what kinds of app a user in your tenant has installed?
Exactly, yeah.
Not today. It's
okay.
Yeah, not today.
As it is a developer call, you can go through the graph and get all installed apps in the Teams. So it is possible from a graph endpoint. This is totally doable.
Okay.
Oh, yeah, absolutely. Maybe from a graph standpoint, but yeah, not in the admin portal.
Mm-hmm.
I have a question too, Rajesh. This question, I don't know if it's right for him to ask, but I don't know how many of you know Reflecto. Anybody can chime in here. Do you know Reflective app, the one where you give kudos to other people? It's a third-party app. So Reflective.
Is it in Teams?
It's a third-party application, but they recently launched a Teams app, which we were very interested in because they use Reflective to engage with employees and say thanks to each other. But what I've learned from the vendor when I said, how do we add this to all the members in my organization? He goes, oh, you have to add this app to the org-wide team, and everybody gets to see it. Is that how apps are added to organizations? I didn't feel that was right.
That sounds right to me. So if you go in here, we typically, if it's an LOB application, you will have to upload it as a line of business application, and then it's made available to all users in the tenant.
I get that, but was actually asking us to add the app to an org-wide team. And we don't have an org-wide team. Is that a necessary? Is that a prerequisite to add apps? I can type in the more details around it, but I don't have chat message here.
More details would help, but is the question, there is a team that's for the entire organization and you want to add an app for that team?
No, I want to add the app to the users, but the vendor told me that unless we have an org-wide team, and this is his exact response, Reflective does need to validate that users are part of the Reflective instance in order to allow that user to log into the Reflective Teams app. Adding the team to the Reflective MS add-on does the check for all the users in the instance. Like I said,
that doesn't sound right to me. If Reflective is an app in Teams, you can go and install it to individual users, whether or not they're part of some desired team or not.
Right?
Yeah, you can apply a policy to go and pin that app. When I say install, I mean pin those apps. Just like how I've pinned Smartsheet, you can go and do that for those users.
Yeah, and this is around next to the text box, where you have all the apps pinned. That's where we want the app to be pinned, not to the left rail, but when they're having a conversation, we want them to quickly get onto Reflective and say thanks to someone through that.
I see. Okay, so it doesn't have the personal scope. So in that case, you cannot do that. So if that app doesn't have and maybe this is something that we can take offline as well, that Reflective app, if it doesn't have a personal scope, then you cannot use admin policies to go and pin it.
Okay.
The user, you can ship it to the store and then the user can go and actually get the app, but you cannot pin it using setup policies.
Oh, okay. So yeah, then he's right.
Okay. I'm sorry I didn't get your question.
Pedro asked a question a while back, and then thank you for typing it in again. It's a little bit off topic, but is there any plan on adding ephemeral messages like in Slack, like a message in a channel or group chat that's only visible to the author who can decide to make it public in the chat?
I wouldn't know. Sorry.
Okay. We will take that as a note to follow up with you, Pedro, and get an answer to that question.
Another question on the team meetings. Are there any option where we can hold the meeting until its scheduled start? Let's say I have scheduled a meeting at 11 a.m., but people join at 10:45. Will that be to hold the meeting until the host joins?
My area is essentially for governing apps within Teams. So this is a question about core features, which is meetings, and the previous question was about chats and channels. So unfortunately, I don't know the answer to that question. I can take a follow-up and get back to you.
Thank you.
Are Are you asking if people can just stay in the lobby, like a lobby, or and not join into the meeting until it's that particular time, or just not even be able to join it at all? Is that what you're asking?
Yeah, I want people to join before host start a meeting.
Got it. You can you can provide feedback for Teams developer. And actually, Rajesh, if you go back to the PowerPoint deck, we have a couple of feedback channels that you can post some of that feedback in and questions around those things. So you can go to the aka.ms Teams Dev Feedback, and you can ask some of those questions around the features. And then the link above that is around developer documentation. But I would suggest you go post that into the Dev Feedback channel.
Thank you.
Yeah. There was another question Alexander had. Is it planned to have a way to automate the process of uploading an app to Teams? As a developer, I want to use Azure pipelines to automatically upload a version of my app with new features, new messaging extensions, for instance, that require a change in the manifest. I know there are graph endpoints for apps in the company app catalog, but I don't want my app to be in the catalog during development. And then those endpoints can only be used by global admins. So the main question is, can you automate the process of uploading an app to Teams with the background information?
It's I think a great feature request. I think it's something that we will take into consideration. So if you look at the entire app lifecycle that I mentioned, my team is broadly focused on streamlining that entire process. So this is great feedback. I think it's a feature request.
Okay, great. And then another question, is there a notification or webhook to know as a dev when a user's uninstalled my bot?
Not today. We don't have any notification mechanism today. But there may be some graph APIs to see, I think we spoke about this earlier, to see if users have certain apps in as part of their experience. But there's no notification or anything of that sort.
Will we be sharing this document with attendees? As far as the PowerPoint deck, we'll post it on SlideShare, and then we'll have a link to that. If you follow our Twitter at Microsoft 365 Dev, and then we post all of our announcements when recordings are available, when we have upcoming features, when we have blogs ready to be posted that you can take advantage of reading. And so that's a good place to go for all of our announcements across the Microsoft 365 platform, not just for Teams, but for SharePoint and Graph as well, and Office add-ins and Identity platform. Pedro, is there anything I'm missing that someone asked in the IM chat that we have not responded to? We have about 5 minutes left. And you can, again, feel free to unmute.
Yeah, a quick comment on the chat capability. I sit in the SharePoint community calls with VESA, and they had an issue with the chat also. And I think what they found was that there's a lot of people from meeting to meeting that are members of this channel, for lack of better words, and that they had to go in and start doing cleanup and removing people to free up new users so they can join the chat. So you might touch base with VESA on that to find out if that's the issue.
Yep, and VESA is still on this call, and he and I have chatted about that, and I thought I had taken care of enough. But we've also notified the Teams team responsible for some of these features regarding meetings about that, as well as a few other kind of little quirks that come up here and there. So we are working on that. But thank you for, I know they had that issue as well. And I think given the nature of what's going on right now, they're working on a lot of these other features to make it a lot easier for all of us to have these calls. Okay, let's go, Rajesh. There's a question about information on when graph calls. Let's see, I'd like to get more information on when graph calls for Teams will RTM and what the plans are for graph Teams calls to support app flow. Those 2 points are preventing customers from being able to use Teams today and also gather information for reporting on the virus.
Oh, I think for graph-related questions, maybe we should have like a community call with one of our graph PMs. Since I don't own the area, I don't want to like comment on these things because.
Yep, that's okay. I'll take this, Dan. We do have a Microsoft Graph community call. It's the first Tuesday of each month. There's a list of all of our community calls here. And we do post them each one separately in our Twitter announcements. We have past recordings in YouTube, and I can get all that information to you guys. But here's a list of all the calls. So adaptive cards, graph, identity platform, the Teams call you're in today, Office add-ins, PowerPoint, and then we have 3 different SharePoint calls that VESA runs. And all of the calls also cross over between the other topic areas as it makes sense. So we do have separate meetings for each one of these, but then if you're in one of the SharePoint calls, it may cover some Teams or Graph or add-ins relating to SharePoint, and same vice versa with all of these other ones as well. So that's just something to consider. We do have a developer events page where we also have all of these calls posted for each month. And so definitely if you download any of these, it will download the calendar series. Right now they go through June, and then we'll set up a new series for the new fiscal year starting in July. And then on that note, also, this particular call for Microsoft Teams falls during build for May. So we're going to cancel the May call specific to Microsoft Teams. And we're hoping, because Build is a free event this year, being all online, that we will continue to post those sessions relating to the Microsoft, the developer platform in general, but also specific to Teams for all of you interested in those sessions. And so we hope that you'll join those sessions in May, and then in June, we'll resume on the 3rd Tuesday of June. And I think our topic for that will be adaptive cards in Teams and some SSO related topics. Does that cover the questions around some of this and crossover between calls and just the platform in general?
I hope this was useful. The piece that I was trying to cover is more so focused on how the work that developers do gets to the users that you desire for, and how the admin persona can help boost that. So please feel free to ask more questions if you have anything, and I'll try my best to answer them.
Is there a Twitter handle that we can ask questions to, Rajesh?
I don't use Twitter as much, but you can certainly reach out to me via my email. I can put it in the chat window, and you guys can certainly reach out to me via email.
Okay, I think that covers it. We're right at the hour. Thank you everyone for joining. Again, follow us on Twitter, look for various announcements, especially around the build sessions coming up. I think there will be a lot of interesting information coming out across the developer platform. And we'll not only get sessions out around Microsoft Teams, but around SharePoint and Graph and all the rest of what's coming up. And then we will see you back here in June. And thank you, Rajesh, for presenting today. It was really great information.
Thank you so much for the opportunity. Thank you all.
Thank you.